Okay, so today we're going to learn about RACIs using the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints structure as an example. So before we dive too far into the RACI, I know that some of you may not be members of this church, and so it's important to kind of understand the structure in order to understand the example. So first off, it's important to note that the church's structure is 100% volunteer clergy, which means that if you're a member of the church, you can be called into any of these positions really, and it doesn't matter what you're. And usually you're doing it while you're doing a full-time job, um, or at a stage in life where you're retired and you're able to give of your time and talents freely. So at one level, we are talking about a prophet and a quorum of 12 apostles. They have a worldwide responsibility. Then you go down to the Area 70, and that's when you start taking the world and breaking it into manageable areas. Then from an area, you have a stake, which is multiple. It's just a smaller piece of that area, and then within a stake, you have multiple wards. So a ward, it would be the smallest geographic region represented in the church. At a ward level, you'd have a bishop who's called to preside and to move forward the work of the Lord within that area. And they're going to have within that ward, you're going to have an elders quorum, which is an individual called to essentially shepherd and minister to males 18 and up. Relief Society, which is the same thing except for women 18 and up. Then you have young women, so again, shepherd and minister to the females 12 through 18. Then for young men 12 through 18. Then you have a primary for children ages 3 through 11. And then you have a nursery for children about a year and a half to 3 years old. So now that you understand the structure a bit better, we're going to step into the RACI. So when someone is called into a position, again, like I said, this is not a professional clergy. This is a volunteer clergy. You have the church provides in its library, and anyone can go here and see this. Go into the gospel library. You have a handbook, and this church handbook essentially goes through all the policies and all of the elements about how do you organize, minister, and shepherd a congregation under the policies and guidance of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So this is first off a very important element to have in any kind of organization, not just this church, but in business or in anything, is generally a well-defined how do we do our business, how do we run our organizations. And that is one of the reasons why, even as a volunteer church, a volunteer-led church, despite what building you go into in whichever geographic region, you will see a crazy amount of synchronization in the church across the entire world. It's very, very powerful when you have essentially doctrine and policies all in one place, so that any member or any member of an organization can align with the standards being set. And so what I've done is I've taken this handbook and broken it into a RACI so that we can talk through this concept of a RACI. So a RACI again is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So anywhere where you see an R, that individual is the person who is responsible to make sure it happens. In terms of accountability, that's also the person who is being held accountable that it happens. Then consulted is when we again go to others and try and figure out I need counsel before I make a decision. And then you have informed, again, these are the individuals who you are essentially saying these are the decisions, these are what's happening, and that individual usually has some type of responsibility or action that they need to do in order to fulfill their own responsibilities. And so when a new bishop is called, this is a very important element of learning how to be a bishop. So a bishop has a presidency. So there's the bishop, and then he generally has two counselors, and then a secretary and a ward clerk. We're going to focus on the bishop and his counselors in this RACI. So there are certain things as a leader, you can't delegate. Only you can do that. And you want to, and usually those are the items that are, as the leader, you see responsible and accountable for. The key of good leadership oftentimes is understanding all of your responsibilities and what you can and can't delegate, because anything that you can delegate, you then want to delegate as much as possible so that you can focus on what only you can do. And so you can see here that I've marked out essentially in a different color those elements that only the bishop can do. And again, the great thing about having a handbook is you can also reference all of the sections within a handbook of where it's defined what an individual can and can't do, and certain notes around it. And so you can see down here, these are examples where at the end of the day, the bishop is accountable that all of these things happen. But for elements that he can delegate, he can take the responsibility that it happens and move that over to one of his counselors. And a lot of time, that's where one of the like the first counselor may be responsible for temple recommend interviews and making sure that that's being tracked and that individuals are receiving those interviews on a regular basis. And then the other counselor might be over youth interviews for temple recommend renewals. So that's essentially the concept. This is something that allows it. Most people who enter a leadership position burn out because they don't understand what they can and can't delegate, and or how to do it effectively. That's what a RACI is meant to do, is enable a leader to be able to hold on to that high energy as they focus on those things that only they can do and delegate the rest and keep track of it, so that when that leader brings those other leaders in to their weekly council usually, can walk down this list and ask how things are going on each of these items and make sure that everyone's being covered. Because what you don't want to do is walk in and say, oh, there's no way I can do all of this, therefore we're only going to choose 2 or 3 of these things doing really well and say that nothing else is going to get done. The reality is that when you enter into a leadership position, you do have a tremendous amount of accountability and responsibility, and the key to achieving success is delegation, and this is how you do it in an organized way. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to our next video. Bye-bye.